This webinar is all about picking up a project post-lockdown in order to restart it and deliver it in the new normal. We'll be taking a look at some practical advice relating to revisiting your business case for all of your paused projects in an interactive manner and exploring what options you have available to you when making decisions about what do you do with your paused projects. In the second half of this webinar, we will look at some tips regarding the efficient delivery of the projects. Whilst these are pertinent to all projects and not just your paused ones, these key points will touch upon where, in my experience, it has been key in making a project a success and therefore protecting the investment of the client in funding the project in the first place. The content of this webinar will take approximately 40 minutes to go through, so leaving times to questions as we go. I'll try hard to finish on time, as I'm sure many of you have got meetings to get to. There is a Q&A box which you'll find on your screen. If you have any questions that you'd like to pose as we go along, please do that. And as I say, I may drop them into the presentation as we go, but as I say, we'll pause for halfway through to have some Q&A and again at the end. So this is me. I am Clive. I've been in and around project to program delivery for a while now, largely in the digital solution space in the last 10 years. I'm a great believer in every day as a school day, so I am always open to suggestions and debate. How else does one become more rounded in their professional life is something that I hold dear to my heart. I am a people person. After all, people deliver projects, and influencing and motivating people around me is a great way to get things done and a key to success. So here's today's agenda. I'll firstly set the scene, and then we'll go on to reevaluating your project by using a whole load of what ifs that we can apply to your project and use that in a very interactive way with your business case. We'll take a couple of minutes for questions then, and then we'll go on to exploring some key tips on making your project a success from both a people perspective, but also from governance and control. We will briefly talk about third parties because they're going to be crucial in all of this, and then we'll have a final Q&A session. Hope that's okay with everybody, so let us press on. This is undoubtedly the reason why your project was suspended in the first place. Only you could decide how long this statement remains at the forefront of your organization's mind in terms of spending this cash on restarting your projects. There are opportunities emerging as the new normal starts to take shape, and many organizations will need to adapt to capitalize on these and ultimately generate more cash. During the many conversations that I've had with business leaders and colleagues over the last few months, or the couple of months, should I say, I have not heard a commitment from anybody yet to carry on with a project or program without first kicking its tires and reevaluating the benefits that it brings. So moving on, a little bit of fun, but it is absolutely pertinent to what we're talking about today. A couple of quotes. The first one, it is not the strongest of species that survives, nor the most intelligent that survives. It is one of the most adaptable to change. Now, this one, I thought this was for Charles Darwin, but it's actually a business quotation and was coined by a professor in management and marketing in the US in the 1960s. And never is that true now. We have to be adaptable to change because we don't know what actually is going to come and be before us in the new normal. And one of my favorite quotes at the bottom, never let a good crisis go to waste. Our very own Winston Churchill in the mid-1940s amidst the Second World War. And we are in a crisis, of course. But the essence of what he was trying to say is that there are opportunities. And try to just keep these in your mind as we go through this webinar today. And finally, before we get on to reevaluating your project, I will use the word project throughout this webinar. You can transpose this to the word program if that's relevant to you, But if we get talking about a matter that relates to a program specifically, I'll point this out. It is human nature to assume that a £20 million project is more important than a £50,000 one. Sure, in the same organisation, they could be compared with apples for apples. But if an organisation turns over £500,000 a year and spends 10% of its turnover on a project, that's the equivalent of Marks and Spencer's spending over £200 million on a project. The cost is not important, it is the criticality to your organisation. So let's get on with the substance of this webinar. Reevaluating your paused project in a manner in which you can reevaluate your business case in an interactive way. This is a typical journey that organizations go on to develop their business case. Firstly, an idea is planted and then it's investigated to determine, at least in principle, if it's worthy of further analysis to formalize the benefit. Business stakeholders, third parties, and a whole range of people in or outside of the organization are engaged, and maybe even a tender process which could occur within the engage step. Out of this comes the costs, the indicative project plans, and the all-important benefits, which are all combined into a proposal. From my experience, there are often challenges in the proposed stage. Can you reduce the cost? Can you deliver it more quickly? Can you find even more benefit? And on occasion, you're not being brave enough, go out and actually add something else to your project. But after some intense scrutiny and rework, the proposal is accepted and the project starts. This webinar is not about building your business case. You've already done that. You have a project in flight. So what I'm proposing is that you resurrect these three elements of this process as you consider your paused projects. So the engagement, and you'll see why that's important as we go on, your timescales and costs, obviously, and what that does to your benefits case. So let's go on and look at some examples. Statements in your business case are always based upon your historical and empirical performance data, which you apply the benefits that your project brings. Statement of fact: we turn over this, we make this as profit, this is how we transact now, we are fixing something that is universally agreed that is broken. It takes this long on average to deal with a customer query. Always empirical and nobody can argue with. So let's look at an imaginary project, and if you forgive me, this project is very much wrapped around my core experience, and we're assuming that this organization has an e-commerce project that it wishes to run. So this is the historical data that have been pulled out to build the business case from. So before the project starts, this organization has 10,000 visits to its website per day. It converts 1.5% of those, and the average basket value is 35. So current daily turnover, a little over £5,000, and current profit 1,100. For those accountants on the call, that's assumed at 22%, and takes into account all of the operating costs. So our project in our business case set out that we'll increase traffic by 10%, we'll add 0.2% to the conversion, and add £2 to the average basket value. So post-project forecast is daily visits go up by 10%, there's your conversion rate, average basket value. So we are forecasting that around £370 a day net profit after the program has delivered, which equates to £135,000 a year. Not a bad statement line to have in your business case. And this, of course, may be one of many different benefit lines that you have outlined in your case. Up until now, I've told you nothing new. You've done all this before. You've got your business case and you have prepared it. But this is the new normal, and you have a problem. The problem is Your historical performance data is no longer empirical. What do I mean by that? Well, let's go back to the core data of our project, our imaginary project. Daily visits, conversion rate, average basket value, as previously stated, but this will not be the position since the 23rd of March. 23rd of March, of course, is when the lockdown occurred in the UK. So let's just think what could have happened to it. If this company supplied products like face masks, hand sanitizer, and the like, I bet the number of daily visits would have rocketed. But if you ran into supply problems, the conversion rate would collapse, and who knows what would happen to the average basket value. Another example, let's assume this company supplies products to the hospitality industry. In this case, the conversion rate and average basket value are entirely irrelevant because the traffic or visits to this website in all likelihood would have collapsed to nothing or thereabouts. So what do we do? The answer is to attempt to get a view of what your performance data is and what it suggests about how your business is recovering. And do this by ruthless monitoring of your performance data and try to establish trends that will give you some insight into what is happening. Do not focus on daily anomalies. That could be taken into that could distort your figures. It may well be a view of green shoots, but try to build trends as you see in the data. Of course, your project may not be like this imaginary project that delivers increased income. It may deliver cost reductions. Your executive will probably look more favorably on these, but only when the furlough scheme ends, all things to take into account. In any case, monitoring the performance of your organization is paramount as we go through this process. So making decisions on the future of your project. So this is our project plan for our imaginary e-commerce project. So at the top is our original plan. And we have built it to be efficient in that phase one delivered something, and that goes live and puts part of the solution live, and phase two overlaps it somewhat. And the reason that we can do that in our imaginary project is that the development team have largely done what they need to do in phase one, and apart from supporting some testing, they then can get on with phase two before phase one goes live. And the only thing that's happened to our project, assuming we make no changes to it whatsoever, is that there is a period of pause which has pushed our project to the right. So what are your options in revisiting the plan, the business case for this project? Or another way of looking at it, what challenges are you likely to get from your sponsors and your executives? Well, let the what ifs start. A common theme may well be throttling the funding for this year or challenges to the overall cost and scope. But just looking at these can immediately begin to understand the impact and cost of benefit, short and longer term for your project. So I've just come up with a few with this one here, and let's just go through each one of these because this will give you a sense of where my mind is as when you're looking at these what ifs. So accelerate your project. Well, we can immediately tell if we do that, we are likely to incur increased short-term spend. Your benefit realization will be brought forward because you'll be delivering earlier, and there is a potential that your overall spend for your project will go down. May or may not, depends what you spend in the short term. Only deliver phase one of our project and reevaluate. Okay, that's an option. What are you going to do with the development team that we're transferring to phase two? Deploy them anyway and start on the solution? But if you cancelled phase two, you've spent money unnecessarily. Or do you roll the dev team off? But if you do that, are you able to bring them back if you decided to continue with phase two? This approach will lead to reducing the short-term spend, but delayed benefit realization and overall cost increase of the project if phase two went ahead. Reprioritize. Another great strategy. Change what is being delivered when. There may be opportunity to concentrate on areas with the biggest benefit, but are they the most complicated, therefore costly to deliver? All of those things need to be weighed up and factored in when considering that particular option. Don't use contractors. If some of your organization or people within your projects, you have got contract resource on there, they are a premium resource. They do cost you more than permanent employees. But if you were to make that statement, don't use contractors, that will save short-term cost. But consider where your expertise is coming from. And will this lead to an overall cost increase? It will probably take longer to deliver, so a delay in benefit realization. Get concessions from your partners. Now, I would say this is the biggest opportunity with regards to any of your paused projects, assuming, of course, that you're using partners to deliver them. Your partners are commercial organizations, and they are hurting too. They will be sure to want you to carry on with the full scope of your project and will no doubt be keen to find a mutually beneficial way of achieving that. So, will they offer you concessions on rates? If you're on a fixed price, will they revisit that? Will they look at that? Will they realize that you're under pressure, your organization is under pressure, and they will do what they can to try and safeguard at least some income into their organization too. So great opportunities engaging with your third parties. And we'll come on to specifically third parties as we go along with this webinar. You could cancel the project. The obvious loss of benefit plus writing off your sunk cost, but no further spend. Reduce the burn rate. Reducing the size of your team, which is probably where a lot of your cost will be, will reduce short-term cost, but delay benefit realization and likely lead to an overall cost increase, assuming you deliver the full scope. You will no doubt come up with a whole list of other what-ifs that are pertinent to your project, and I encourage you to do so. So when it comes to answering the what-ifs, be inclusive. Try to consult a broad audience, both within your organization, your execs, the project team, the wider business, the customers of your project within your business or organization, and third parties. It touched on engaging third parties on the previous slide. This is absolutely crucial, not just in getting concessions from them, but their willingness in providing options and into this process to give you some sort of options on how you may go ahead and deliver. They are a crucial stakeholder to help influence your decisions. Whether you accept those proposals or not, of course, is entirely up to you, but do engage them. Slowing the delivery translates into delayed business benefit. I have been on many projects where that particular point is lost. If a project is delayed for whatever reason, the benefit that it delivers is also delayed, which translates to a cost to your organization. So keep that in mind when you're doing the what ifs. If you do come up with a strategy to delay things, and that might be the correct strategy for you to take, be sure to factor in the delayed benefit realization. So, and if you delay phase 2, in our project example, can you maintain the same team, or will you have to start from scratch? The latter will increase overall costs. So try and include continuity into your thinking. We touched on including contractors or not. I think that could be a commercial decision within your organization. If we don't deliver phase 2, what are the costs of keeping phase 1 running? If you have incurred increased running costs, so in our example, hosting, support, etc., when phase 1 goes live, can the benefits that phase 1, which of course is only going to be a subset of the total benefit, justify this operating cost? It may do, it may not, but absolutely include the fact your OPEX costs are a factor in your business case. And my advice is don't cancel your project, at least not yet. Leave it paused until further performance data becomes available. This may inform your decision. The right decision may be to cancel your project, but let the evidence tell that rather than an emotion at the time, which is not backed up by your evidence. So, in summary, never make decisions on the future of your project without first evaluating all of the consequences, some of which may not be obvious. And the what if process will help you drive those out. Approach this what if exercise if you were back in your business case development, that nobody has heard of the project, you're putting through a business case and you're looking to present it. Try to anticipate the challenges that are going to come when you get into that propose stage. Ask as many what if questions as you can think of. Some of them you'll dismiss relatively quickly as not worthy of further investigation, but some of them will be absolute nuggets which you can dive in and understand the consequences of, and then determine whether you wish to put that into a proposal or dismiss it later down the line. And please, please don't forget your OPEX costs, your operating costs that support your project. If you put something live, there will be a cost into maintaining that. If you deliver a subset of your project, will those costs justify or rule out the partial business benefits that you have obtained from delivering part of your project? Absolute key point. As is the next one, be absolutely decisive. You've gone through your what ifs, you've worked through your scenarios of what that means, both from a business case perspective and how a project may be organized to support those what ifs. If you justify a restart, the whole project part of it, do so with confidence. Do not tiptoe, let's see what happens. That's a recipe for disaster and generating more costs. If you say, right, we are going to just deliver phase one, that's what we're going to do, fine, go for it. And resource your project appropriately in order to achieve that goal, and then focus on all of your efforts on that goal. And we'll come on to some tips in the second half of this webinar about delivering more efficiency. Make sure you have benefit realization tracking process in place. Some organizations I've worked with have gone as far as building the benefits of a particular project into their P&L account. If you state you are going to be reducing cost, that cost is removed from the following year's forecast, so you have to achieve it. Others monitor and report on it, and others don't seem to bother. Do not be in this latter group. If you haven't got a process now in which you will monitor the business benefit of your project, however, whatever the scope is of that project, create one and get consensus that that's how we're going to monitor it. At least then you'll have evidence for future projects that this project said it would do X, Y, and Z. It said it would deliver this, and this is what it actually delivered. So we'll pause for a couple of questions. So I can see that there's some on here. So how would we deal with an executive that is not interested in having a conversation about restarting the project? Really, really good question. I guess that it would go back to what I said about the what ifs and actually investigating those and pulling out all of the key the key facts that could be presented. Be prepared with this information and engage on the root causes of the objection. Almost, I guess, cash is king is probably going to be a real key one. Be prepared for the no answer when you're talking to these executives, and be clear on what the true costs of cancelling a project are. If it's an objection, of just not now. Keep monitoring the business performance. We touched on that earlier. Absolutely, you should do that, and ask for regular reviews, I guess, on the business case and on the benefits of restarting or not. And I guess just one thing to add to that is, if you're not convinced that the project is going to be worthy of a restart, then why are you bothering with your execs on that? So allow yourself to be convinced. We have another one. How do I deal with a project that is not optional? Well, I'm assuming you mean a project which has been brought about by some sort of legislation, or GDPR, or other types of things. Or I suppose another example of that could be fixing security. You may have had a security audit, found some vulnerabilities, and the risk of actually keeping those there without fixing them, I guess, is big. Well, I think from this point of view, your rigor room is probably reduced, I would have thought. And I would engage on two fronts. Firstly, with your execs, just you would with any project. But secondly, with any regulatory body. If you've got to deliver something for legislation and compliance, contact the body which are going to be monitoring you. I am sure, I don't know, but I am sure that they will be willing to talk about an extension if you've got a particular time limit. You have to do that. But I mean, I guess another thing was, if your project is not optional, and by that definition you have to do it, I guess be wary of the risks of pausing it too long. I mean, only you can decide on the criticality of that program or project. And finally, before we move on, I'll just take one more. What if the evaluation reveals that you need a completely different project? Fantastic question. Well, I guess you would have to come to this conclusion because your business case no longer stacks up for the one you've got, or you've identified a far more pressing opportunity. Like that quote from Winston Churchill, never let a good crisis go to waste. You maybe have identified an absolute gem. I guess my recommendation would be to continue with your business case monitoring of your original project, and then decide whether this opportunity or reason to do something differently is either a change to what you're doing or is a completely new project, and act accordingly. If it's a completely new project, you've been through the business case development, create another one. Maybe leave the one you've got paused. That would be my view. So just a word on questions. If we might not be able to answer them all on this call, but any that we don't answer, we'll actually create at the end of this, pose all questions into a document along with answers, and we'll distribute that. And one word to say that this webinar will be posted with audio, and also the slides will be sent out to everybody on the call. So, delivering more efficiently. As part of your restart of your project, there may be a possibility to make changes within your project team, which could include the PM or key members of your project. If you felt things weren't going right before. Depending on how far you're along on your project, you will have different views on the effectiveness of your project team. In this section, we will look at how you drive efficiency to your project. Efficiency means delivering as much as possible at the right quality for the least amount of effort and therefore cost. The first thing to remember is that projects are delivered by human beings. Yeah, sure, there are solutions, or should I say, the solutions delivered are the actual tools that bring the benefit when engaged with the end user. But without the right people in the right roles, delivery will be tough, and you may be subjected to increased cost if you miss deadlines or you have to drag a project team across the line as opposed to it driving you. So first of all, project management. Some organizations don't understand what a project manager does or even brings to the party. And only when things start to go horribly wrong does the realization dawn. Think of a project manager as your insurance policy in the project delivering on its promises. So therefore, it's a pretty important role. So you may ask, why do we hear about so many projects and programs coming off the rails, sometimes spectacularly, with massive cost overruns or disastrous go-lives? They had project managers. You may remember TSB new systems launch in 2018, Northern Rail's implementation of a new timetable, both very public failures that damaged their brand. Both of these were project management failures. TSB clearly went live without sufficient testing. The project manager must have known, but maybe he or she was pressured. Similarly with Northern Rail, did they carry out any scenario testing before implementation? And again, maybe pressure from management launched a project that simply was not ready. You don't want to be in that group, obviously. Project methodologies are very important as they prescribe control and governance. In delivering a successful project, but far too often I see project managers beholden to the doctrine of the methodology and by consequence not having a duty of care for the organization they serve. My advice to you in the strongest term is to avoid these people. If you are interviewing for a project or program manager, yes, test them on the questions of their governance and control. That's vitally important. But don't just listen to their words that they say to you. Ask yourself, do you believe in what they are saying? Would they look to influence and maybe even challenge you if they believed from their perspective you were taking a path, however well-intentioned, that would place the project at risk? Would you be comfortable for this person to stand in front of your executives and hold their own? Are they immediately likable and approachable? Vitally important. If not, walk away. A key to success is that all project managers, sponsors, and stakeholders can have meaningful and open conversations with the project manager and feel that the project manager is approachable. Maybe put them into the TSB situation. If a demand was made by the executive to put a solution live that wasn't ready, what would they do? If they say, well, he was the boss, he or she was the boss, and that's the decision was made, so therefore my hands were tied, run a mile. Do not employ them. The most appropriate response, I guess, would be that I'd wish to engage directly with the executive, discuss this demand with a view to influencing the decision. You don't want a maverick, but you do need somebody who is approachable, determined and principled with a demonstrable duty of care. That's really key. And we'll go on to now onto the qualities of your team. Now, these 7 qualities on the presentation now, you may recognize. They came from the Nolan principles, implemented by Lord Nolan in the mid-1990s and slightly adapted for this presentation. They were originally designed for the qualities that everybody who holds public office should have. But they are pertinent to your project team, every member of your project team. When you get to more and more specialist roles, developers, architects, etc., the view of the wider world, or their view of the wider world, or the wider project narrows. That's all right because they're not the project manager, they're brought on to be a specialist. I often get challenges from talented specialists that I respect and admire who may have a purist view. I don't mind this at all, as it shows they care, but the suggestions might not be appropriate for the project just from their viewpoint. Another good reason for a strong project manager is to be able to have these open conversations, but not just take something from a specialist as fact and implement it, have that wider view, but really key that those conversations happen. The traits on this slide may be familiar, some of them, because of what I've just said, the Nolan principles. My advice would be to have these at hand when you're interviewing for project roles. I often sit in on interviews for highly specialist project roles, always supported by somebody who can challenge the candidate on their expertise, which I couldn't on the specialism. But what I'm looking for is the cultural fit and these traits. Having a brilliant technician who is selfish, closed, and not objective is more of a risk to the project than not having that skill set at all. So, just a piece of advice, whether you take it or not, is totally up to you. But it's really key to trying to get that culture into your team that's focused on the delivery. Many of you may have projects that are entirely run by a third party. So the project manager and all of your key project teams are actually supplied by this third party to deliver your goal. That doesn't stop you applying these qualities to that team. Does your project manager have the qualities that we explained on the previous slide? Do the consultants or anybody other resources from your third party adhere to these qualities? And you'll notice nothing on here about their technical brilliance or their knowledge of the subject. That's taken for granted. I wouldn't expect to be paying for a consultant to come to my project to do something if they didn't know what they were talking about. And of course, having people who are focused and have those principles and are really engaged and driving towards target is brilliant. But again, they could be a loose cannon without governance and cadence. So ensure that your project board meets regularly and is effective. If you don't have a project board, create one. It's very, very important that your executives have a view into the project. If you do have a project board, consider renaming it to a steering committee. Many of you probably will have steering committees now anyway, because having a steering committee is something that is far better for me. For instance, from my personal experience, I want to use the execs on these boards to give me a steer. I want to approach them and say, look, we have a challenge on the project or program. These are the options that we've got before them, and I recommend this. Please, can you give me a steer? If your project is led by your partners, let them present to you. I've said each month on there that the interval between these meetings can be set by yourselves, but have them present to your executive, to your steering committee. Let them chair, whether they do every one, and maybe this group meets weekly, but once a month, maybe you'll have your partners coming in to present their view of the project. The good way of telling whether they're doing a good job or not when it comes to the stakeholder engagement of your senior executives and yourself is there should be no surprises in that presentation. If your project is large and maybe affects a large number of people within your organization, if you haven't done already, give it a name and turn it into an entity. It may sound like a gimmick, but it really is effective. And the one thing that I would say about steering committees as a whole is executives are often very busy and sometimes can't attend. If they can't attend a meeting, there's probably little point in holding it and cancelling it, but you should follow that up. You should complain. And if they cannot give the commitment, have somebody with the appointed or delegated responsibility who can join it. It is paramount that you have executive involvement. Your project manager should create a weekly and monthly cadence for all meetings. This could be on the wall. This could be, everybody should know what this is. Now, whether that's meetings within the project team, such as daily stand-ups, or wider executive engagement like steering groups, change boards, of the like, they all should be diarized. So every month that you know and everybody else knows who could be attending any one of these sessions, what's happening when. Do not leave them to be ad hoc. Sure, you may need ad hoc sessions to deal with particular points, but have a cadence of regular meetings. Every meeting should have clear actions and outcomes. Having just advised you have meetings, don't have them for meeting's sake. If there is no purpose for a meeting, of course, cancel them. Every meeting should be targeted and have a clear objective. And if you've got the people, like we've talked earlier, with the right mentality, the right approach, that will kind of look after itself, but your project manager should be driving that. You should have a published RACI. For those of you who have not come across that term before, it means responsibility, accountability, consulted, or informed. Every single person on your organization that touches this project should be on that list. The project manager, the executive, all of the project team, your customers within the project where you need to get knowledge from, your third parties. And for every name, you assign one or more of those characteristics. Are they responsible for this particular task? Whole list of tasks. Are they accountable for it? Are they consulted or informed? Absolutely fundamental that everybody knows what their role is, and it's a really good and effective way of doing that. Use a shared issues and risk log with your partners. Many partners that I've been involved with that are delivering a project to me, and maybe as part of a bigger program, or it is the program, very much like to keep their issues and risk logs to themselves. They may present them when they come at the end of every month to the exec board and say, here's the issues list, let's move on. But utilize a shared one. And maybe when you're engaging with your partners, looking for concessions that we talked about earlier, talk about ways of working as well, where your shared issues risk link can be pulled together. That will have the effect of pulling your organizations together from within the project. And having a one team approach is absolutely key. So take that on there and use visual graphics, posters, newsletters, etc. within your organization in the canteens, or not that they're open at the moment, but along the walls of the offices. Newsletters probably very effective at the moment when everyone's working remotely. This goes hand in hand with the project name and identity. And again, if your project touches a lot of people or will touch a lot of people, it helps to keep your organization informed. And when I've landed into projects or programs that have been running for a while, and we pick them up, and they tend not to have a name. So let's go back to our pretend e-commerce project. Well, this is the project that Bill's runs. He's doing something with e-commerce. There is no entity there. If you gave it a name, and it'd be a good fun thing to do, get your project team involved as well as your executives and what the name is. You will soon, once you start to communicate that about what's going on, what's happening next, how would they be affected in whatever medium at all, you will start to hear around your offices people referring to this entity. And engagement with that entity becomes far easier because it's not something that's mythical now, it's something within the organization. And please remember that line at the bottom, communication is everything. Or if you're to flip that on its head, silence breeds discontent. So keep communicating. And finally, we will go on to third parties. This is the last slide, and I hear your cheering. We have alluded to this as we've gone through today's session. For the sake of your objective, encourage a one team approach with your partners. Yeah, sure, you have a customer supplier contract which underpins this project, but please don't run the project on that basis. Try to bring your partners and your own team members together, that if anybody was to walk into your project office, and well, they won't at the moment, but a project office post lockdown, and they weren't familiar with your project, they should not be able to tell who works for the third party, who works for your internal organization. Bring them together. It adds a huge amount. If your partners run the project, suggest or even insist on getting closer to their teams to help them deliver. They will probably naturally want to keep you at semi arm's length. They do the way that they want to do. Some partners that I've been involved in have a philosophy of doing projects to customers as opposed to with them. You want to change that. Do not treat your partners as the enemy. You may have had difficulties up until now, but they are your colleagues in delivery, and try to find a way of moving forward. Try to listen to what their concerns are and reach a consensus. And ultimately, if your partners cannot support your goals, then serious discussions, maybe at exec level, need to occur. Don't brush that under the carpet. Pressing on with a bad partner is going to be difficult, but changing your partner is also risky. I've done it on a couple of occasions when I've changed a partner. Now, luckily, on both occasions, it worked out well, but it was tough. It was really tough. So it's not a decision to be taken lightly. Okay, let's go on to Q&A then. So let's just have a look. So my supplier runs my project and provides the project manager and team members. What can I do if I don't have the qualities you outlined? Well, I guess it comes down to engagement with your partners. It is here where you need to have frank conversations. The traits I outlined are not optional for a successful project, they are mandatory. So explore what can be done. I guess if your partner cannot provide a PM, for instance, that meets your satisfaction, the qualities that we've just outlined. So an option may be obviously talk to the organisation. Do they have another project manager that you might want to engage with? Or an alternative might be bringing your own project manager, but that will have a cost. So therefore, talk to your partner, I guess, and see if they will help fund that cost and you take on some of the project management responsibility. So executives are likely to be busier than ever as we start to establish the new commercial position. Are there meeting formats you'd recommend to drive attendance and engagement? Really, really good question. Alluded on it earlier on, is that you go charging into their office and say, look, Mr. Executive or Mrs. Executive, I want to start your project and sign it off. You're probably not going to get very far. What I would want to do is engage those senior executives, inform them initially of what you're doing. You're going through this what if processes. You're looking at options, and you would look to create a session to explore those options. You may not wish to have a proposal at that stage, but it might be if the time is right, you may well want to. So what I would do is get a small group of your exec, trying to get your entire executive team, the entire board together to talk about this one subject may well be difficult because, to your point, they are very busy. So maybe pick off one or two of these executives, get them behind the process that you are doing. When they are sitting at their board meetings, maybe just have a slot. You might only have 10 minutes, but use those. But ideally, you would like to create a meeting yourself where you can drive the agenda. But as you said, they're going to be busy. Do not pack it out for an hour or so. Try and make it punchy. When choosing a supplier or partner, do you have a well-tested appraisal framework or matrix you could recommend, particularly after identifying the current partner or supplier can no longer meet your requirements? A fantastic question and a position that I've been in a number of times when I've been asked to pick up projects that are partway through. So yes, I do. There is a framework that I have worked with that are part of very much like a tender process. So a tender process may have specifics on what a solution does, but it will also have specific questions on how that partner will deliver to you. So not just the project plan, but how they will engage with you. And there'll be questions in there on how they'll do that, and ask them to look at articulating that to specific questions that drive out that fact. And another thing to go along with this, if you are considering another partner, or I suppose it's pertinent if you are considering it as part of a new project, not particularly started one, is that the ability to actually go and talk to their previous clients, maybe on their project performance. I mean, the solution they bring aside, of course, you want to talk to them about that, but we are talking about the project specifically. How did they engage with the customer? What recommendations would they give in making the project smooth? And what I will do, Jason, who posed this question, I'll pull out some of the documentations that I've used in the past, and I will circulate it to everybody as a guideline. I'd say it will probably have to be amended for your project, but it may give you some indication. So that's it from me. Where are we? So we are 6 minutes before the end. That's not bad. I did say that we'd finish by 12 noon. So it's been a great pleasure to be with you today. And as I said before, number of former colleagues on the call, and it was great to be with you. People from across Europe, some of which I know, some of don't, and people that I'm connected to on LinkedIn. But I'm delighted that you attended today. I really do hope that you found it useful, and please get in touch. If there's any specific questions, I would be more than happy to discuss them with you. So on that, I'll leave you to go and grab a coffee before your next meeting, and thank you very much.